Welcome and good evening to Baptist Orthodoxy, Episode 7, Something About Mary. As I've mentioned before, as my wife and I, started moving towards Orthodoxy, I had my nose stuck in some of the early church writings, and I was trying to view, what did the early church believe, and then which church is going to, is actually doing those things. And of course, I started leaning more and more towards Orthodoxy. So my wife starts looking at Orthodoxy, and she's much more social than I am, I guess. Starts hopping out on Facebook and stuff like that, looking at various things that were out there. And one of the concerns that she came back to me with was this apparent worship of Mary. And she's like, this is almost a non-starter, or this is a non-starter if they're doing this. So I'm like, okay, well, let me dig into it and find out what we got going on, right? So number one question is, are they in some means worshiping Mary? And if not, then what's going on? Those are kind of the two questions that I was going into this thing with. So I thought one of the big spots to check was the ecumenical councils. I also have my notes from this time period, so I was using, I tried to use my notes to kind of follow along with how I'd written those out when I wrote her, because that said to me that's kind of the order in which I presented information to her, so I figured I'd present it in the same order here. And also I've learned several other things since then, so I've added those in as well. So what I did was I looked at the ecumenical councils first, and we have this Council of Ephesus. Now, in the Council of Ephesus is the one in which they go ahead and address the Nestorianism. And Nestorius was essentially saying that Christ was two different people, that he was the man Jesus and the Logos, and it's almost like the Logos was superimposed on Jesus, or kind of melded with Jesus as to be the Christ. And of course, the church comes out and says, no, Jesus was fully God and fully man. He is the Logos, or the Logos is Jesus, however you want to look at it. And as part of that question, and really where it came up, was Nestorius did not want to use the term Theotokos, which is Greek for, I believe the closer translation would be God birther, right? Sometimes you'll hear it God bearer, and then sometimes you'll also hear the term Mother of God, although Theotokos actually refers to the carrying of Jesus. But he didn't want to use that term, and of course, if the Logos was not actually Jesus, and Jesus was just that the man that the Logos combined with, then she wouldn't necessarily be God bearer, right? But as it turns out, church said yes. Jesus is the Logos. Logos is Jesus. He is God, fully God and fully man, and therefore Mary was Theotokos. And this, now then, there are early signs before this. This was 341 AD, I think. I got it written down somewhere around here. 431 AD is when they have this discussion. Much earlier than that, we have not only the use of the term Theotokos, but I'm going to take it all the way back to the Bible and show you where I believe the veneration was all the way back to New Testament times of the Virgin Mary. Now then, one of the reasons why perhaps it hadn't proliferated quite this way, right? There was a lot of discussion back and forth, Christological discussions and things like that. So when you have this concern being covered at the Council of Ephesus, which is the Third Ecumenical Council, and Nestorius was the Bishop of Constantinople, which is second in honor only to Rome. It's where the capital of the Roman Empire is. And so obviously there was a lot of, unknowns, I guess, floating around. And so I could very easily see, if you have someone that high up, the Patriarch of Constantinople, who's not taking that position, that there's probably a lot of other people who didn't know exactly, how do we treat Mary? And so following the council, I think it would only make sense that you're going to see more of a proliferation of Mary stuff, because the church has come down solidly and said, Mary is Theotokos, she is the God birther, and therefore the kind of cleared the muddy water, if you will. And I think that that probably made people more comfortable in showing their respect and honor for Mary. The what was my next piece after that? Okay, now then my notes went ahead and they jumped from Ephesus to directly into some follow-on arguments, but or talking about the veneration of Mary. When did veneration start? What evidence do we have of the veneration, so on and so forth, things like that. Which tells me, I'd already talked with my wife, and one of my previous episodes where I talk about the icons and the difference between veneration and worship, which is laid out solidly in the Seventh Ecumenical Council for sure, but that the early church, distinguished. There's a difference, and we can see it here in the modern era. But there's a difference between showing honor, which is veneration to someone or something, and worship, which is what we give to God alone. Therefore, perfect example, any military member, right? Whenever you go ahead and you see an officer of a higher rank, it's courtesy to offer a salute, or you show honor to the flag. So anytime you pass the national colors and they're uncased, and you're outdoors, or you have a cover on for whatever reason, then you go ahead and salute, right? So you extend these honors to either these people or these things. This is very similar, at least I see it as very similar to what we're doing here, right? So these are either people who are important because of what God has done through them, or I guess, well, in the case of icons, it's kind of like the flag. They're representative of something. They're representative of these people that God has worked through, and therefore you extend honor to those, and you salute. At least that's how I see the sign of the cross, right? It's a show of respect, a show of honor. Now then, so there we go. Veneration and worship. The church does not worship Mary, but it does definitely venerate the Virgin Mary, and for good reason. She was the God bearer. That gets me to, we didn't talk about Mary much as a Baptist, right? So I'm doing Baptist Orthodoxy. So Baptist-wise, we didn't talk much about Mary, and to be honest, Mary was, almost a sideline character most of the time, other than having a nice Christmas story, right? In the birth of Jesus, and you talk about what this young girl may have been going through a little bit, so on and so forth. But then once Jesus is born, Mary and Joseph both are almost thrown out with the bathwater. If you're reading the book of Luke, you do have your nice little story that you can read about Jesus disappearing, right, and them having to search him out. But from a Baptist perspective, right, they go back to Jerusalem, seek him out, and they find him at the temple teaching, or at the synagogue teaching. But what you find, at least from my Baptist upbringing, was the focus wasn't so much on Joseph and Mary. The focus was almost totally on, look, Jesus is sitting here talking with rabbis at the age of 12 and holding his own, right? So obviously we got something special going on there. And then other than coming up with later on talking about, oh, look, Mary had all these other kids, and then that's it, right? You don't even see Joseph in those later years. So not a lot of appreciation for Mary from a Baptist perspective. Now then, one of the things I'd like to point out is, she was the lady who God chose to bear, birth, and raise him in his incarnation. So just think about that one for just a moment, right? God chose this young lady to go ahead and carry him in her womb and then to raise him in his actual incarnation. And yet we don't really give her the appreciation probably that she's due in that regard. And some are, particularly from my Baptist perspective, was, she didn't do anything, right? A lot of your Calvinists, no offense there, but I was, in a Reformed church too. And Calvinism, when it gets extended, goes ahead and God ordains everything, makes everything happen. And we really have no choice in these things. The Eastern Church does not see things that way, right? We do have a choice. So when the angel came to Mary and told her what the plan was, and she didn't balk at it or anything like that, right? That's seen as a really big thing. She was obedient where Eve was disobedient, right? And but the piece I wanted to throw out, this part anyway, I want to talk about when the angel comes shortly. But the piece I want to talk about first is when you look at it, Elizabeth and Zacharias, again in the book of Luke, they are referred to as righteous and, is it righteous and blameless before God? Yeah, righteous and blameless before God. And they're only selected to bear and birth John the Baptist. And yet Mary is the one chosen to go ahead and carry the Christ. Again, I think there was probably more than we give credit for from a Baptist perspective going on with Mary. Now then, when was Mary actually venerated? When do we have signs of that? And initially, I had some stuff lined up, and I was going to talk about, Mary was, we have signs of Mary veneration going back to the early 2nd century with this icon of her, an image of her in the tombs in Rome, and then the Subtuum Praesidium, which is a prayer asking Mary to watch over and help you. That dates back as early as 209 AD, right? So a couple of really early items there. But let's just go back to the Bible. But in the Bible, I would argue that you have veneration there. When Gabriel shows up to go ahead and announce that Mary is going to have a child, unlike everybody else, you can pretty much look at every other visit from an angel where the individual knows it's an angel, and they're either falling down on their face or they're worried they're going to die. And normally the angel just drops a, fear not, I got this message for you, and make sure you do what God says, gives the message and disappears. But in this case, the angel shows up, obviously an angel, Gabriel, and in this, now then with Joseph, shows up in his dreams. For Mary, he shows up in person. And he doesn't show up and essentially just drop the bomb of, hey, here's the information. He refers to her as the one full of grace, or either also most favored, depending on which translation you look at. So he greets her as most favored one. You're most blessed among women. Okay, that's the only time you see an angel greet somebody with these sorts of accolades. Then, after she gets word of this, she's also notified by the angel that her cousin, her much older cousin, Elizabeth, is pregnant with John. And 6 months pregnant, as a matter of fact. Now then, this will be the sign, if you will, that what the angel has said is going to come true, because to the best of, if you go back and you look at the book of Luke, Elizabeth is hiding this fact that she got pregnant. Okay, so they're praying And the angel finally, or the God finally answers their request, and she conceives, but she's what they thought was past the age by which she could have a child. So she's hiding the fact. I think she was hiding it because she didn't want to get everybody all excited, to include herself, and then come to find out that, her old body can't maintain the baby and she loses the child, right? So I think that's why she was kind of hiding it. So at this point, Mary doesn't know. It's about 6 months in, and so the angel tells her, so she goes to visit Elizabeth. She walks in the door, and John, upon hearing her voice, and I think this is kind of interesting. It's not John when he feels the presence of Jesus. It's when John hears Mary's voice, he's filled with the Holy Spirit, and he jumps for joy because he knows who it is. And Elizabeth says something along the lines of, who am I that you would deign to visit me, the mother of my Lord. And so, she throws out a couple of accolades. I can't remember the first one, but, she says something to her. And then later on, she said, they talk about her being most blessed among women, kind of repeating what the angel said. But just those two instances right there, right? So the angel extends Mary honor. And then, which you don't see angels doing that. And then Elizabeth extends her honor. Not only does she extend her honor, but one of these titles that we end up using, an extension, like I said, Mother of God, which is the one of those versions of Theotokos that people will use. But even though it's not a direct translation of it. And yet here we have Elizabeth using the term Mother of God. Now, she says it different. She says Mother of my Lord, but she's talking about God. So basically, she is the first user of this term, if you look at it, right? So, Mother of my Lord, Mother of God. Why are you visiting me? What, and so just those two titles, I'd say we got some serious veneration going on there. Now, then you can also see there's a book out there or story called the Proto-Evangelium. Also the Epistle of James. Anyway, it's supposed to be written by James, but the earliest that we can lock it down is right around 155 AD or so. We have a couple of second century writers who are referring to it. And so it's too old, seems to be too old for James to have written it. It would not surprise me at some point in the future if we do find some evidence that actually pushes it back further. But as it is, this is a second century document, and it goes through and it lists out all these various, it talks about Mary and what's going on with her, how she comes to the temple, how she's raised, who her parents were, who Joseph is to her, and all these various things. I'm not going to get into the Proto-Evangelium too much, but I just wanted to point out that we have this early writing that is obviously a book about Mary and showing why Mary should be honored and how honored Mary was during her life by all the apostles. We just don't have that for anybody, right? That was one of the arguments that we had as a Baptist, was that, oh, it's not in the Bible. True, but you have nothing about the life of Peter. How was life with his wife? Did he have kids? How did he balance managing his wife and kids and being a major apostle? What was going on with Paul? I've heard some references say that they believe perhaps Paul was married, because after he gets converted, he goes home and he stays home for like 10 years before he goes out and starts his missionary journeys. What was he doing during those 10 years? Was he just studying? Was he just pondering what was going on himself, or was he, had he had a contracted marriage, so he actually had a wife, he went back to her and hung out? We don't know, right? Because it never talks about the private lives of these individuals. So this book comes out, and it's talking about essentially the private life of Mary and everything that surrounded her. Now there's some complaints about there being fantastical things and stuff like that. Again, I don't want to get into those. And for practical purposes, let's just say it's a children's story for these purposes here. Even if it is just a children's story, it shows very early on there was a great love and honor, if you will, for the Virgin Mary, right? To have this whole story written. So you have that going on. You have the early writings from the Bible. Like I said, you have these images that they found in the tomb. And of course, we find others later in pretty much every place that we have images. There's almost always an image of the Theotokos there holding the baby Jesus. We've got the Subtuum Praesidium. I mentioned that poem. Then you have individuals using the word Theotokos. So we have what? St. Basil uses the term. St. Athanasius uses the term. Now, St. Athanasius uses the term, and they're both around the same time. They're early 4th century, early to mid 4th century. So right around 350, 325 to 375, right in that area. And so St. Athanasius, he uses the term Theotokos. St. Basil, he has a letter. And again, you get into this. He has this letter 360, which is talks about veneration for the Theotokos and such. And there are people who are, oh no, that's a spurious letter. He didn't write it. Well, how do you know Basil didn't write it? Well, there's subject matter that he hasn't written about in any other letter. Now then, supposedly, I think I talked about this in the icon one, because he talks about venerating icons in that as well, and as well as the saints who have passed. And so it really seems like modern scholars, because a lot of these doubters and critics are coming from 19th century or later than 16th century, right, when you have your Reformation. And they're kind of discarding, just like Luther wanted to go ahead and discard the book of James, maybe even the book of Hebrews, because it drew into question some of the stuff that he wanted to push. And so it seems like many others following on to that, whenever you run across some of these writings that obviously fly in the face and are a direct counter to what they claim, such as St. Basil's letter 360, in which he venerates icons, venerates saints, and refers to Mary as the ever virgin and talks about veneration for her. They want to be like, oh no, that's a spurious letter. That wasn't actually written by him. That was written later in order to support this, that, or the other thing. And yet, you have St. Athanasius is already using the term Theotokos. St. Basil, so we have a liturgy written by St. Basil that is still used today. So, but according to a follow-on treatise by a bishop in Rome, somewhere around about 100 years after he would have written this, they're saying that St. Basil actually, he didn't just write it from nothing. No, he shortened the liturgy. So he was noticing that people were falling asleep and not paying attention in the liturgy, and therefore taking pity on their, what do they call it, slovenliness or something like that. It's a very negative term that the Pope writing the treatise uses, but that Basil decided to shorten the liturgy, and so he goes in and shortens it. Well, all through St. Basil's liturgy is references to and praise for the Theotokos. So this thing apparently precedes St. Basil, St. Basil goes ahead and gets a hold of it, and he doesn't, he shortens it. So that tells me he more than likely didn't add all these references to Theotokos, but maybe he did. But either way, that shows that if he added them, then he's a major user of the word Theotokos because he put it in everywhere. If he's not the one who added in, he just subtracted stuff, then that means this was a liturgy that preceded him, and how old was it that he was handed, right? That he decided to shorten. Either way, Theotokos is a very common term. The Theotokos herself is a highly venerated individual at this point in history. And then it just all comes to a head in 431 AD, so that they have to have the Council of Ephesus to discuss this piece. All right, let's see. Historical writings, so I covered that one. So now that I'm going to get into some more specifically going after certain points. But Mary Ever Virgin, I didn't think this was going to be that big of a deal. But in the past, I hadn't really looked at it that much. Again, Mary, not that big of a character from a Baptist standpoint. But my daughters, of course, I have 3 of them. And they were very interested in the Virgin Mary because, that's a direct tie, right? She's a really young lady who gives birth to the baby Jesus, and baby's all exciting to young girls and stuff like that. So they wanted to know, did she have other children, right? And so I do a cursory look at the Bible, and I'm like, yeah, it seems so. It mentions his brothers and sisters and things like that. And then once I started looking otherwise, right, I kind of took off my Baptist lenses and exchanged them for an early church lenses. And I get to looking at some of this stuff, and I'm like, how come I didn't see this before? It's like right there in front of you when you start, when you actually start looking, and you don't want to look past it. And so in this case, I was like, apparently I was wrong, right? I've been going down a whole trail of, I was wrong here, I was wrong there. But in this instance, I ran into some individuals, though, when I started talking to them about it, other Protestants, that I vociferously fighting against the idea that Mary was ever virgin, right? Oh, she had children, she was married to Joseph, so she, they had to consummate the marriage, and all these other things that they went ahead and named. So I wanted to go ahead and talk to some of those points. Number one is the quick word study. And I don't know if I have my notes for my word study out. Give me 1 second. Okay, so 2 word studies that I want to talk about. Now then, number one is in the Septuagint, the word used for brothers is adelphos. Now then, it turns out adelphos can be used for word cousins or any close male relative. And you can see this, like in the Old Testament, in the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, you have, Abraham and Lot. Lot is referred to as Abraham's adelphos. But we know that Lot was his nephew, not his brother, right? And there's a couple other references in there. I think Jeremiah and the book of Tobit, Leviticus, use it in that way, right? So it's kind of a general close male relative. So brothers-in-law or stepbrothers would be adelphos, right? Now then, when we'll get to, I have a whole series of verses I want to talk about. So, but suffice to say that adelphos can be used for both cousin and brother. Another one that, if one of the really cool Bible studies I thought was whenever you start talking about the, 1 John 3:19, 3:9, somewhere in there, I may have it written down. 1 John 3:9. So in 1 John 3:9, we have, it's mentioned that he who is of God doesn't sin because he has God in him. And when you start, most of the Bible studies that I was in on that, probably 3 of them at least, that it was talked about, was that this does not sin does not mean that the individual who has God doesn't sin at all, right? Doesn't mean you're immune from sinning. It means that you don't live a lifestyle of sinning. So conveniently, that does not there. It's a present active indicative verb. Now then, without jumping into the Greek and stuff, because I'm just right on the top of that, but it was presented to me that that's what that means, right? Because it's a present active indicative verb, that it's more of a constant lifestyle, right? That's what we're talking about when we're sinning. Well, conveniently, when Gabriel comes in and announces to Mary that she's going to give birth to the Son of God, she says, "How is this possible, since I know not a man?" Now then, in there, it's not, "I haven't known a man," right? Or that it is, "I know not a man." Now then, this is the exact same. It's present active indicative verb. So essentially what Mary is saying there, and what the Eastern Church teaches, that she was one of the virgins of the temple, and she was working there, and that she came to live with Joseph because she had hit puberty, and therefore, while she was menstruating, she's going to be ritually unclean, right? So she cannot participate, or she can't live in the temple during that time period, and therefore someone needed to take care of her, because women don't have any significant rights in this time in history. And so Joseph is chosen to be the one to take care of her and to get into this betrothal with her. And so she goes to live with him. But this language right here, which matches up with the previous language of, you don't live this lifestyle of sinning. Well, she doesn't live a lifestyle of knowing a man, right? She's still in this temple virgin mindset. And therefore, it would seem that this ties in directly with that. She had no intention of having relations with a man when she gets notified of the angel Gabriel. Now then, some might be, well, no, this is just because this was prior to her being married that she said this. Well, the counter to that one could very easily be when the angel announces that she's going to, have this child, and she's already betrothed. So if she's going through a regular marriage, why wasn't her first inclination, "Oh, well, me and Joseph are going to have this wonderful child together"? But that's not her first inclination. Her question is, how am I going to have a kid? I don't know a man. Not that I haven't known a man, or not going to know a man. I don't know a man. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting. I am no Greek expert, so I'm not going to die on that molehill. But I think that is a very strong piece of evidence right there, particularly when you couple it with the fact that Mary doesn't mention anything about her upcoming marriage, or assuming that it's going to be their child, right? But instead, she makes this statement and then gets told, of course, the Holy Spirit's going to come upon you. All right. Now, I know this is a little longer than usual. I'm sorry about that, but this is just a big piece, right? The next thing I wanted to talk about was who are these brothers that Mary or that Jesus has, right? Are they Mary's children? And so to that end, I have numerous verses that I want to read. It turns out that when you start reading it, and there's multiple Marys, so it gets a little confusing. And but there is a Mary in there who gets referred to as the other Mary. And so I'm going to read you various verses about the other Mary and about some of these brothers. And I think it directly points that the other Mary, and not Mary, the mother of Jesus, is the mother of these other individuals who are running about. And so I'm going to pull this down and just go through these relatively quickly. And I think it'll become clear what part these play, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit after I get through them. So in Matthew 13:55, "Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas?" Now they're now doing this to name off these brothers. Matthew 27:56, "Among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons." Okay, so now then we have this Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, who were mentioned previously as the brothers of Jesus. Matthew 27:61. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the tomb. I just threw this one in because it just shows that this other Mary is right there with the group, right? So now we know for sure we have Mary, the mother of Jesus, we got Mary Magdalene, and we got the other Mary floating around. Matthew 28:1. Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. So again, these two are hanging out together. They're going to do things, but it's not Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mark 6:3. Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? So they were offended at him. Again, this is just giving us some names to tie in with Jesus. Mark 15:40, though, there were also women looking on from afar, among whom were, now in here, we're going to go ahead and get more separation. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less, and of Joseph, and Salome. So now we're naming more of those boys, right? So wrapping in more of them with this other Mary. Mark 15:47. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, observed where he was laid. So again, just tying her to the other boys. Mark 16:1. Now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him. Just beating that dead horse, I know. John 19:25. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So here I believe we're naming the other Mary, right? So they've been all hanging out together and doing things together. And so now Mary, and this confirms, right? So in the others, I guess you potentially could have argued, well, they're just naming her other kids and not tying her to Jesus and those, right? But that's Mary. But no, here it specifies. So we have at the cross of Jesus, his mother, so that's Mary, the mother of Jesus, and then his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Now then a couple things here. I don't think she's a blood relative to Mary. That would be kind of strange, right? For a set of parents to have two kids and name them Mary and Mary. That would get very confusing, even if they're a couple years apart. My wife and I, we get the names of our girls confused all the time, and they're 2 years apart, and they all have different names. So I think it'd be bad enough that way, much less if you're calling them both Mary. So I think it's much more likely, and the Proto-Evangelium supports this, I think. I haven't finished reading the full Evangelion yet. But that Clopas is the brother of Joseph. So both brothers, decided that they wanted to go marry a Mary, and or perhaps their parents liked the name Mary, and they contracted to get them married to Marys. I know, kind of confusing. But anyway, we have Mary, the wife of Clopas, and that's who I think this is. I think that's a very sound argument right there when you take this combined with Mary's reaction previously that Mary didn't have other children other than Jesus. Oh, actually, well, I'm going to touch on it when I get into some of the early church fathers and their thoughts on Mary. But there you go. From the Bible, the verses, I think, support that she didn't have all these other children. They are adelphos in that they are close male relatives. The word for sister can be used the same way, but they are not actual brothers, but they are cousins because they are the sons and daughters of Mary, the wife of Clopas. Okay, now then, for historical belief, I'm going to hit on some of these, and I just want to get their quotes direct, so I'm going to look down a little bit. Sorry about that, and I'll try to adjust my paper so I'm looking up. I know it's not polite to look down, but what do we got? Historical belief. We got St. Hippolytus, who was a bishop of Rome, and he says, but the pious confession of the believer is that the creator of all things incorporated with himself a rational soul and a sensible body from the all-holy Mary, ever virgin, by an undefiled conception, without conversion, and was made man in nature, but separate from wickedness. All right, so St. Hippolytus, the Bishop of Rome, in AD 210, is all about the all-holy Mary, ever virgin, right? So this is coming from 210. So we have an official statement from the Bishop of Rome back in 210, very early. Saint Hilary, Bishop of Poitiers. I really like this one because I think this is a killer argument, and that is, if they had been Mary's sons and not those taken from Joseph's former marriage, or in this case, perhaps the sons of Clopas, she would never have been given over in the moment of the Passion to the Apostle John as his mother, the Lord saying to each, "Woman, behold your son," and to John, "Behold your mother." And so one of the big things with this is it was a big deal in Jewish society, right? For the children to take care of the parents. So if she had all these other sons running around, she would have had someone to take care of her. Now then, it speaks volumes that Jesus apparently doesn't think that she's going to have anybody to take care of her. And so he has to tie her to a man in this society. And so he does. He ties her to John. And then she goes to live with John and lives out the rest of her days with him. So I think St. Hilary has an excellent one right there, above and beyond, those other pieces that I touched on. Now then, St. Athanasius, I already talked about him in his letter 360, but he's like, let those therefore who deny that the Son is by nature from the Father and proper to his essence deny also that he took true human flesh from the ever Virgin Mary. There, using the term ever virgin in 360 AD. Okay, now then, it's just not early church fathers nor Bible verses that support it, but even the early reformers, right? This is a later development in the reform movement, a much later. I'm not even sure where it takes up, but John Calvin, and some of these are taken from some of their writings, or in some cases, some of their, I was going to say homilies, but some of the messages that they preached, right? But John Calvin said that Helvidius displayed excessive ignorance in concluding that Mary must have had many sons, because Christ's brothers are sometimes mentioned. Then, elsewhere, under the word brethren, the Hebrews include all cousins and other relations, whatever may be the degree of affinity. And then his last one that I wanted to mention is, but there were some crazy people who wanted to gather from this passage that the Virgin Mary had other children than the Son of God after Joseph had lived with her. And that's from his Sermon 22 on the Harmony of the Gospels. Martin Luther on the subject says Christ was the only son of Mary, and the Virgin Mary bore no children besides him. Brothers really means cousins here, for Holy Writ and the Jews always call cousins brothers. Okay, so, and it turns out that even Zwingli, who's like an extreme radical, Luther refers to him as like a zealot and doesn't want anything to do with him, right? So even this most radical of the early reformers, he believed the Virgin Mary was the ever Virgin Mary. So I'm not sure where it dropped, but in the trying to remove what they saw as the errors of the Roman Church at that point in time, the further it went, the more things that they threw out that were tied to, historically, all the way back to the beginning tradition. And just because the word tradition was tied to some of these things, I think it got thrown out without actually being looked at and being considered as to whether or not there was reason to support it. So that's what I've got to say on the Virgin Mary. I just wanted to cover those things. Hopefully I wasn't too distracting by moving around and grabbing some stuff, but I wanted to make sure that I gave you good info. And moving forward, I'm going to look at doing a couple other things. If anybody wants me to address any questions that I may have had, let me know. I know several of the other individuals out there, or I know several other individuals who have moved from Baptist or Reformed theology towards Orthodoxy, and or are leaning towards Orthodoxy. And so I hope to get some of them on here and go ahead and just ask them and have a back and forth conversation about, hey, what was it that caught you up? What got you to look at things differently? Like I said, early on, mine was looking at unity, and then that changed my allowed me to change my perspective, should I say. And as I always like to give credit, one of my favorite Bible teachers, Bob, he used to say, you need to keep a teachable spirit. So if you keep that teachable spirit, And then you find that thing that is going to allow you to change that perspective, that paradigm, so that you can look at things for what they are and not necessarily what's been pitched to you the entire time. Then perhaps you can see things for how they truly are and not just with your rose-colored glasses on. So that's what I want to talk about, some of these individuals. What was your aha moment, if you will? And hopefully we can have some good conversations there. So thanks for joining me. And until next time, God bless. And may you glorify God in all that you do. Thank you.